The morning sun touched the glass walls of Mr. Stone's mansion, making the white marble floors shine like water. Inside, everything looked perfect except for the man who owned it. Mr. Stone sat at a long dining table, scrolling through his phone, his sharp suit spotless, his expression cold. Grace moved quietly in the background, dusting shelves and arranging flowers. She wore a plain uniform, but her calm face carried a quiet strength. She had worked in many houses before, but none like this one. Mr. Stone hardly looked at her when he spoke. "Coffee," he said without lifting his eyes. Grace placed the silver tray on the table. "Yes, sir." He took a sip, frowned, and slammed the cup down. "Too cold. Do it again. And hurry up. I don't have all day." Grace nodded, took the cup back, and went to the kitchen. She had learned long ago not to take harsh words to heart. People who shouted usually shouted because something was wrong inside them, not because of her. When she returned with fresh coffee, Mr. Stone was already barking orders into his phone. "I don't care what it takes, fix it. I'm not losing this deal because you can't do your job." He ended the call, tossed his phone on the table, and pointed at Grace. "Why are you still standing there? Shut up and work. Clean that window. It's streaked." Grace lowered her eyes. "Yes, sir." She took a cloth and began polishing the tall glass windows, moving slowly and carefully. She didn't argue. She didn't remind him she had already cleaned them an hour ago. Instead, she hummed softly to herself, just loud enough for her own ears. Mr. Stone watched her for a moment. He didn't understand people like her. Why didn't she speak back? Why didn't she quit? If anyone had told him a few months ago that a maid would still show up every day while he shouted at her, he would have laughed. But Grace needed this job. Her younger brother was in school, and every paycheck mattered. She worked without complaint, not because she was weak, but because she had a goal bigger than pride. Mr. Stone turned his attention back to his phone. His hands shook slightly as he scrolled through messages. More bad news from his partners. More problems with the deal he had been chasing for months. His life was made of numbers and meetings, and right now, all those numbers were turning against him. Grace noticed his face tighten. Even when he shouted, his eyes looked worried, almost scared. She had seen fear before. Her family had known hard days, days without food, days when bills piled up. She recognized that look. "Shall I bring breakfast now, sir?" she asked gently. "I'm not hungry," he snapped. "Just keep working. Don't stand there." Grace nodded again and continued cleaning, moving from window to window. But she was thinking, why is he so angry today? Something must be wrong. Outside, a gardener walked past, trimming roses. Grace caught a glimpse of the peaceful sky and let herself breathe. She thought of her brother, probably walking to school now with his backpack. That thought gave her strength. When she finished the windows, she went to the dining table to clear the dishes. Mr. Stone's untouched coffee sat there. He hadn't taken a single sip this time. He was staring at an email, jaw clenched, as if the words on the screen were poison. "Sir," Grace said softly, "if you want, I can bring tea instead." "It might help," I said. "Shut up and work." His voice cracked like a whip. Grace stepped back, her face calm. She didn't argue. She picked up the tray and walked to the kitchen, but inside, she sighed. Not because her feelings were hurt, she had learned how to stay steady, but because she wondered how long a man could live like this, shouting at everyone while his own heart burned with worry. In the kitchen, she whispered to herself, just a few more hours. Just do your best. She thought of her dream, saving enough to move her brother into a better school, maybe even study something herself one day. She smiled faintly. No rich man's anger could take away her dream. Back in the dining room, Mr. Stone paced like a trapped animal. He called someone again, shouting even louder this time. Grace overheard a few words: loss, failure, deadline. It was clear now, the powerful businessman was fighting to keep something from falling apart. Grace quietly returned with a clean cloth to polish the table. She worked without sound, her movements neat and precise. Mr. Stone barely noticed her. But deep inside, something was stirring. When his phone buzzed again, he grabbed it, read the message, and cursed under his breath. His face turned pale. For a brief second, he looked like a child lost in a storm. Grace glanced at him, then lowered her eyes. She wanted to say something kind, but she knew he wouldn't listen yet. So she stayed silent, doing her work as if nothing happened. Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling gold light into the room. The mansion looked beautiful, but inside it felt cold. Mr. Stone's anger filled the air like smoke. Grace's quiet patience was the only fresh breeze in the house. As she wiped the last corner of the table, she whispered a prayer not for herself, but for him. "May he find peace," she said under her breath. Mr. Stone didn't hear her. He was too busy making another call, his voice shaking, his eyes flashing with fear. But very soon, everything in his life would change, and when it did, he would remember this calm, steady woman who kept working without hate in her heart. The rest of the morning passed in silence, except for the sound of Mr. Stone's voice shouting into his phone. Grace stayed in the background, moving from room to room with her cleaning supplies. She didn't speak unless necessary, and she never looked him directly in the eye when he was angry. But Grace was observant. She noticed the small signs that something serious was happening. Mr. Stone's expensive watch kept sliding on his wrist because his hands trembled. The lines on his forehead seemed deeper than yesterday. Even the way he walked, quick, restless steps, like someone who couldn't stay still, told her this wasn't an ordinary bad mood. Around noon, Mr. Stone threw his phone onto the couch with a heavy sigh. He sat down, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. It was rare to see him like that. Normally, he acted untouchable, as if the whole world worked for him. Grace entered quietly with a tray of water and fruit. "Sir, you didn't eat breakfast," she said gently. "Maybe you should." "I told you I'm not hungry," he cut her off, but his voice wasn't sharp this time. It sounded tired. Grace set the tray down anyway. "It's just water," she said softly. "In case you need it." Mr. Stone didn't reply. He kept staring at the floor. Grace turned to leave, but for a moment, she saw his reflection in the glass door. His eyes were not angry anymore, they were worried. What could make a man with so much money look so afraid? Grace wondered. She thought of her own family. When her brother fell sick last winter, she had stayed awake all night praying for help. She had felt that same worry, the kind that sat heavy in your chest and made breathing hard. A few minutes later, Grace was in the hallway dusting a shelf when she heard him on the phone again, speaking in a low voice this time. "I can't lose this contract. No, listen to me. I've invested everything. If this fails, I'm finished." His words made her pause. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but it wasn't hard to hear when his voice echoed in the marble hall. Finished. That didn't sound like the proud Mr. Stone she knew. Grace went back to her work, pretending not to notice, but the picture in her mind began to change. She had always seen him as a man who had everything: money, power, a mansion so big you could get lost inside. Now she realized he might not feel rich at all. Maybe he was scared of losing everything. Later in the afternoon, while she polished the staircase railing, Mr. Stone passed by, still on his phone. He didn't even glance at her, but she heard him mutter, "I need that money by tonight. Find someone, anyone who can help." Grace lowered her eyes, hiding a small frown. Even a rich man can feel trapped, she thought. He's looking for someone to save him, but money isn't always the real problem. When she went to the kitchen to prepare tea for herself, the cook shook his head and whispered, "The boss is in trouble. I heard the security man talking. Some deal is going bad." Grace only smiled politely. She didn't like to gossip. But inside, she felt something new, sympathy. Not pity. Mr. Stone didn't seem like the kind of man who would accept pity, but genuine concern. By late afternoon, the house felt heavy, as if the air itself carried Mr. Stone's stress. Grace finished her tasks more quietly than usual, careful not to disturb him. She didn't want to add even a small reason for him to shout again. When she passed through the living room to collect empty glasses, she saw him sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at his phone as if waiting for bad news. His tie was loose now, his hair slightly messy. For a man who cared so much about appearances, that was unusual. Grace hesitated. She almost spoke, almost asked, "Are you all right, sir?" But then she remembered his words from earlier, "Shut up and work." So she stayed silent and kept moving. But her heart was soft. As she picked up a glass from the side table, she whispered inside her head, "Whatever you're fighting, I hope you win. And I hope you learn what really matters." Evening came, and the sun painted the windows with a rich orange glow. Grace wiped down the last counter in the kitchen. She could hear Mr. Stone still making calls, his voice louder again, full of desperation. Suddenly, there was a crash from the study, a sound like glass breaking. Grace ran to the door and knocked. "Sir? Are you all right? Leave me alone." Mr. Stone's voice cracked, not with anger, but something else. Something closer to pain. Grace stood outside for a moment, unsure. She didn't want to anger him further, but she also didn't want to walk away if he was hurt. In the end, she returned to her work, trusting that he would call if he needed help. But as she dusted the hallway mirror, she caught her own reflection and thought about what kind of man Mr. Stone really was. Maybe beneath the shouting and the wealth, he was just another person scared of losing control. When her shift ended, she packed her things quietly. On her way out, she passed the study again. The door was slightly open now. Inside, she saw Mr. Stone sitting on the floor, papers scattered around him, staring at nothing. He didn't even notice her. Grace stepped away softly, leaving him alone with his thoughts. But as she walked down the driveway under the fading evening light, she felt something she hadn't expected, a quiet determination. She didn't know why, but she wanted to help him, not because he was her boss, not because he had money, but because no one deserved to look that lonely in such a big house. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow will be different. Somehow, I'll find a way to help." The next morning, the mansion felt colder than usual. Grace arrived early, as she always did, carrying her cleaning supplies and a calm smile. But when she opened the heavy front door, she sensed the tension right away. The air seemed heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mr. Stone was already awake, sitting in the living room with his laptop open and papers spread across the coffee table. He wore the same suit as yesterday, but the jacket hung loosely, and his shirt was wrinkled. He looked as if he hadn't slept. Grace set down her bag and greeted him softly. "Good morning, sir." He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the glowing screen. Grace went about her work quietly, dusting the large wooden shelves in the hallway. Every now and then, she heard Mr. Stone muttering to himself. "This can't be happening, not now. I need that signature." His voice sounded thin, almost broken. A few minutes later, his phone rang. He snatched it up and spoke sharply. "Tell them I'll pay double if I have to. Just get them to agree." There was a long pause. Then his voice rose, angry and desperate. "What do you mean they walked away? Do you know what this means for me?" Grace could hear every word as she polished the glass door nearby. She kept her head down, but her heart tightened. This wasn't just business trouble, this was fear. Mr. Stone slammed the phone down and stood up so quickly that the table shook. A cup of coffee toppled, spilling dark liquid across the expensive carpet. Grace hurried over with a cloth. "I'll clean it, sir," but before she could bend down, Mr. Stone barked, "Can't you do anything right? You're always in the way." Grace froze for just a second. The words were harsh, but she reminded herself he wasn't angry at her. He was angry at his own life. She knelt down and began blotting the stain without a word. Mr. Stone paced the room like a caged animal. "Everything I worked for, gone. Just like that." His hands trembled as he rubbed his forehead. "Do you know how much this deal was worth?" "Of course you don't. You wouldn't understand." Grace kept her eyes on the carpet, wiping carefully. "Maybe I don't understand money, sir," she said softly, "but I understand what it's like to lose something important." Mr. Stone stopped pacing and stared at her. For a moment, he looked as if he might say something. But then he turned away with a frustrated laugh. "What could you possibly know about that?" Grace didn't answer. She just kept working, her movements calm and steady. Inside, though, her heart beat faster. She wanted to tell him about her brother, about the nights she stayed up worrying whether she could pay his school fees. But she knew this wasn't the right time. He wouldn't hear her now. The phone rang again. Mr. Stone grabbed it, listened for a few seconds, then shouted so loudly that even the gardener outside could probably hear. "No. I'm not selling. I don't care what it costs me." He stopped abruptly, breathing hard, then threw the phone onto the sofa. Grace finished cleaning the carpet and quietly left the room. She didn't want to be in his path if his temper flared again. But as she walked down the hallway, she whispered to herself, "He's not just angry. He's scared." Later, while Grace polished the staircase railing, Mr. Stone appeared again. His eyes were red, as if he'd been awake all night. "Why is this railing still dusty?" he snapped, though there was no dust at all. Grace simply wiped it again. "It's clean now, sir." Her calm voice made his anger falter for just a second. But then he shook his head and muttered, "Everyone's useless. Everyone." Grace bit her lip but said nothing. She had learned that sometimes silence was the best answer. But in her heart, she prayed quietly, "Please, let him see what really matters before it's too late." By afternoon, the pressure inside the mansion felt unbearable. Mr. Stone received another call. This one must have been worse than all the rest. His face turned pale, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had finally landed on him. Grace found him sitting on the floor of his study, surrounded by crumpled papers. He didn't even notice her enter. "Sir," she said softly from the doorway, "shall I bring you some water?" He looked up, startled, his eyes wild. "Water? Do you think water will fix this? I'm ruined. Do you hear me? Ruined." Grace took a step inside, holding her hands together. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean." "Stop talking," he shouted. "Just do your job and leave me alone." The words echoed off the walls. Grace's heart ached, but she didn't flinch. She set the glass of water on the table anyway. As she turned to go, she whispered, "Sir, sometimes when things break, it's a chance to start fresh." He didn't reply. He just buried his face in his hands. Grace walked back to the kitchen slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. She knew this man was reaching his breaking point. And though he didn't know it yet, someone would need to stand by him, not to serve him, but to remind him that he was still human. That night, as Grace left the mansion, she glanced back at the tall windows glowing under the evening sky. Somewhere inside, Mr. Stone sat alone in his wealth, yet poorer than ever in peace of mind. Grace whispered again, "Tomorrow, I'll try again. Maybe I can help, even if he never knows." The following morning, clouds covered the sun, casting a gray shadow over the mansion. Grace arrived early, as usual, carrying her cleaning bag and a quiet determination. She had promised herself the night before that she would keep calm, no matter how much Mr. Stone shouted. But when she opened the door, she knew something serious had happened. The marble floor of the entryway was littered with papers. Expensive envelopes lay torn, and one of Mr. Stone's shoes had been kicked aside. Grace's heart tightened. She walked carefully, afraid she might disturb something fragile, though it was clear the real storm had already passed through. From the study came a voice, not loud this time, but low and broken. Mr. Stone was on the phone again. "There's no one left to call," he said. "The deal is gone. Everything's gone." Grace paused at the door. She had never heard his voice sound so hollow. He didn't shout, didn't order anyone around. It was as if all his anger had burned out, leaving only smoke. She knocked gently. "Sir? Should I come back later?" "Do whatever you want," he muttered without looking up. His suit jacket was on the floor, and his tie hung loose around his neck. His usually neat hair was messy, his face pale. Grace stepped inside and quietly began gathering the scattered papers. Most of them were contracts and financial statements, things she didn't understand fully. But she saw big numbers written in red ink, words like loss and deadline. "You don't have to do that," Mr. Stone said bitterly. "None of it matters now." Grace looked at him carefully. "It must matter to you," she said softly. He let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I spent 10 years building my company. One bad deal, and it's over. Do you know what it's like to watch everything you worked for disappear?" Grace thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "I know what it's like to lose sleep wondering how to pay for school fees. I know what it's like to worry about someone you love every single day." Mr. Stone stared at her, surprised. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not soft, not rude, just real. Before he could respond, his phone rang again. He snatched it up, listened for a moment, and his face drained of color. "You're pulling out too? Fine. Do whatever you want." He ended the call and threw the phone onto the carpet. He sank into his chair, covering his face with both hands. "I'm finished," he whispered. "It's over." Grace felt a wave of sympathy. The man who told her to shut up and work yesterday now looked small and lost. For a moment, she forgot he was her employer. He was just another human being in pain. "Sir," she said gently, "maybe it's not over. Maybe this is just a hard turn." Mr. Stone gave her a tired look. "That's easy for you to say. You have nothing to lose." Grace stood a little straighter. "I have everything to lose, sir. I have a brother who depends on me. Every coin I earn feeds him and keeps him in school. If I lost my job, I would start again. So can you." Her calm words hit him harder than any business failure. For the first time, Mr. Stone didn't see Grace as just a maid. He saw her as someone stronger than he was at this moment. But before he could say anything, another call came in. This time he didn't even answer. He just stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. Grace placed a glass of water on the desk. "You should drink, sir. Even strong people need water." Mr. Stone gave a weak laugh and actually picked it up. "You're strange," he muttered. "You don't act afraid of me." "I'm not afraid," Grace said simply. "I just see you're hurting." Her words silenced him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the doorbell rang. Mr. Stone went to answer it himself. Grace heard muffled voices in the entryway. When he returned, his face was pale again. "It was a courier," he said flatly. "Official notice. They're taking the company headquarters if I don't pay by tonight." Grace didn't fully understand what that meant, but she could see it was bad. Very bad. Mr. Stone sat down heavily. Do you know what it feels like to be powerful in the morning and powerless by nightfall? Grace thought carefully. It feels like being human, sir. He looked at her sharply, then let out a breath. For the first time, his voice softened. How do you stay calm? How do you not hate people who treat you badly? Grace smiled faintly. Because anger won't feed my brother. Kindness will. Mr. Stone lowered his eyes. The words cut deep. That evening, as Grace prepared to leave, she noticed Mr. Stone sitting alone on the staircase, staring into space. His pride was gone, his confidence shattered. He didn't even shout when she walked past. Good night, sir, she said gently. He looked up at her, his eyes tired. For the first time, he nodded. Good night, Grace. It was a small gesture, but it felt heavy with meaning. For the first time, he had used her name. Grace stepped out into the cool evening air, her heart full of thoughts. Something told her tomorrow would bring even greater change because a man who could finally say goodnight might soon learn to say I'm sorry. The next morning, the mansion was unusually quiet. Grace entered carrying her cleaning bag, but her eyes searched for Mr. Stone immediately. Usually, she heard his voice before even stepping inside, sharp, commanding, impatient. Today, there was nothing but silence. She found him sitting in the living room, still wearing yesterday's clothes. The curtains were half closed, leaving the room in dull shadow. Empty coffee cups and papers were scattered everywhere. Good morning, sir, Grace said softly. Mr. Stone lifted his head. His eyes looked tired, but there was no anger in them, only confusion. Morning, he said, his voice low. Grace set down her bag and began tidying the table. Would you like fresh coffee? He hesitated, then nodded. Yes, please. The last word surprised them both. Mr. Stone rarely used it. When Grace returned with a steaming cup, he accepted it with an unsteady hand. Thank you, he murmured. Grace looked at him carefully. Did you sleep at all? No, he admitted. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers falling apart. I saw everything I built slipping away. Grace wiped the table slowly. Numbers aren't everything, sir. Mr. Stone let out a bitter laugh. That's easy to say when you're not losing millions. Grace straightened her back. It's also easy to forget what millions are for. They're for people, aren't they? For helping family, building something good. If you forget the people, the numbers mean nothing. Her words were simple, but they hit him harder than any meeting or warning call. For the first time, he felt someone speak to him not as a boss, not as a rich man, but as a human being who needed to hear the truth. Grace continued her work quietly, dusting shelves and arranging flowers. But she wasn't just cleaning, she was thinking. She could see how close Mr. Stone was to breaking completely. Someone needed to remind him he was more than his money. By late morning, Mr. Stone's phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen but didn't pick up. Another creditor, he muttered. They all want me to pay today. I can't. Grace set down her cloth and looked at him steadily. Sir, sometimes you can't control what falls apart. But you can control what kind of man you are while it happens. Mr. Stone blinked. What do you mean? Yesterday, you told me to shut up, Grace said calmly, not angry, just honest. But I didn't walk away. I kept working. Because I know who I am. Do you know who you are, sir, when there's no money, no company, no power? The question made him fall silent. No one had ever dared to speak to him like that. Strangely, he didn't feel offended. He felt awake. I don't know, Mr. Stone admitted finally. I've always been the man with the company. The man with the mansion. Without those, who am I? Grace gave a small, kind smile. That's for you to find out. But I think you're better than the man who shouts at people just because he's scared. Mr. Stone lowered his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words sounded strange coming from him, but they were real. Grace nodded once. Thank you, sir. Then she returned to polishing the table as if nothing unusual had happened. The hours passed quietly. Mr. Stone sat in his chair, thinking instead of shouting. Grace's steady movements, her soft humming as she worked, filled the silence with peace. He realized he had never really looked at her before, never noticed how calm she stayed even when he was at his worst. Why do you work so hard? He asked suddenly. Even when I treat you badly, you keep going. Why? Grace kept wiping the table. Because I have someone counting on me. My younger brother. He's in school, and I promised him he'll have a better life. My job is not just about cleaning. It's about keeping that promise. Mr. Stone leaned back, letting her words sink in. She works for someone else's future, he thought. Not for herself alone. He felt a strange twist in his chest, guilt, respect, and something like admiration all at once. By afternoon, another call came in. This time, Mr. Stone answered, but his voice was different. He wasn't angry, just tired. I understand, yes, I'll sign whatever papers are needed. Do what you have to do. He ended the call, then looked at Grace. They're taking my office building, he said. By tonight, it's gone. My company will be half its size by tomorrow. Grace met his eyes calmly. You're still here, sir. You're still breathing. That means you can start again. Mr. Stone rubbed his face. How can you be so calm when I'm falling apart? Because I've been there, Grace said simply. When my parents passed away, I had nothing. But I learned something important: people help people, not money. And you're lucky, sir, you have people around you if you choose to see them. Her voice was gentle, but her words carried weight. For the first time in years, Mr. Stone felt smaller, but in a good way. Not crushed, just humbled. As Grace prepared to leave that evening, Mr. Stone walked her to the door. He had never done that before. Grace, he said quietly, thank you. For not giving up on your work, and maybe for not giving up on me. Grace smiled softly. Tomorrow is a new day, sir. Good night. He watched her walk down the driveway, her shoulders straight, her steps steady. She had no mansion, no company, yet she carried herself like someone rich in ways he couldn't understand, at least not yet. That night, Mr. Stone sat alone in the quiet house and thought about her words. For the first time in his life, he realized strength was not about shouting, but about staying calm when everything falls apart. The rain poured harder, beating against the tall glass windows of Daniel's office. He stood there, staring at his reflection. The sharp, confident man he once knew looked different now. His suit was still perfect, but his eyes, they were tired, hollow, and full of worry. His phone buzzed again, another message from the board of directors. Emergency meeting. Investors want answers. For the first time in years, Daniel felt fear. Everything he had built, all his wealth and power, was slipping away like sand through his fingers. Meanwhile, Maria walked home through the rain. She clutched her umbrella tightly, but her heart was heavier than the storm above her. She remembered every harsh word Daniel had spoken to her, every cold look, every moment she felt invisible. Yet she also remembered the man she saw yesterday, the same man, but broken, struggling to hide his pain. At her small kitchen table, Maria sat down and whispered a prayer. Lord, give me strength. And if there's a chance, help him see the truth. The next morning, Daniel arrived at his office only to be greeted by chaos. His assistant whispered nervously, Sir, The investors are furious. They're talking about removing you as CEO. Daniel straightened his tie, forcing calmness. They won't dare. I built this company. But when he walked into the boardroom, the faces staring back at him told another story. Daniel, said Mr. Harris, the senior board member, our stock has crashed. Clients are leaving. And your refusal to change your ways is costing us everything. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. I made you all rich. And now you want to betray me. No, Harris said firmly. We want you to listen. Apologize. Make amends with your employees, your partners, and yes, even the people you've mistreated. Daniel's pride burned hotter than ever. I don't apologize to anyone, he snapped, walking out of the room. Outside the building, reporters waited. Microphones shoved into his face, cameras flashing. Questions rained down like arrows. Mr. Blake, is it true your company is facing bankruptcy? Sir, do you regret your treatment of your employees? Is it true a former maid saved your reputation with clients last year? Daniel froze at that last question. Maria's name wasn't spoken, but he knew who they meant. That simple woman, and how her kindness had impressed a visiting client when he hadn't cared. He pushed through the crowd without answering, but the words stuck in his mind like thorns. That night, Daniel returned to his mansion, but the grand halls felt emptier than ever. He poured himself a drink, but even the taste of success felt bitter now. He walked past Maria's old cleaning cart. He had never thrown it away, though he told himself it was meaningless. For the first time, he realized it reminded him of her courage. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was his lawyer. Daniel, you have to listen to me. Tomorrow the board will vote. If you don't change your attitude, you're finished. This is your last chance. The call ended, and Daniel sank into his chair, his head in his hands. All his life, he believed money was everything. But now, with everything on the line, the only person he could think about was Maria, the maid he had humiliated, the one who showed strength without power, the one who left with dignity while he was drowning in pride. The next morning, Daniel drove through the city streets until he reached a quiet neighborhood. He stopped in front of a modest home. For a long moment, he sat there, staring at the door, unable to move. Finally, he stepped out into the cool morning air. Maria was sweeping her porch when she saw the black luxury car pull up. She blinked in surprise as Daniel Blake, the mighty millionaire, walked up her steps, his expensive shoes getting dirty on her humble path. Maria, he said quietly. His voice carried none of its old sharpness. She stood still, her broom in hand. What are you doing here, Mr. Blake? He looked at her with eyes she had never seen before, tired, sincere, almost pleading. I need your help. Maria frowned. Help? From me? Yes, he admitted, swallowing his pride. I've lost control of everything. The company, my name, even myself. I treated you terribly. I was cruel, and I never said I'm sorry. But now I see I was wrong about everything. Maria stayed silent, watching him. The man who once looked down on her was now standing like a schoolboy waiting for forgiveness. Please, Daniel said, his voice cracking. Teach me how to be, like you. Strong. Honest. Kind. I don't know how. Maria slowly set down her broom. The sight of Daniel Blake, the proud millionaire, now humbled and desperate, touched her heart. Mr. Blake, she said softly, you don't need my help to be kind. You just need to choose it. Daniel shook his head. I don't know if I can. I've spent my whole life thinking money made me better than everyone else. But now I see I'm the poorest man alive. Maria hesitated, then nodded. If you're serious, start by apologizing. Not just to me, but to everyone you've hurt. Daniel's lips trembled. The word apologize was heavier than any business deal he'd ever made. But looking into Maria's calm, steady eyes, he realized she was giving him something no one else ever had: a second chance. The morning sun shone through the tall windows of the company building, scattering golden light across the polished floors. Inside, workers moved quickly, whispering to one another. Something was different today. There was tension in the air, but also a sense of hope. Everyone knew something important was about to happen. Maya walked through the lobby, her uniform crisp and clean. For 15 years, she had walked these same halls quietly at night, unnoticed, ignored, sometimes even mocked. But today was different. Today, she would no longer be invisible. The employees gathered in the main hall. Some stared at her in disbelief, some whispered in excitement, and a few looked away, unsure of what to expect. At the head of the room, the board members waited. And behind them, Richard Hale, the CEO who had ruled with arrogance and fear, stood nervously. Maya stepped forward calmly. Her voice, soft but firm, carried across the room. "Good morning," she began. "For 15 years, I have worked quietly in this company. I have seen what people are capable of: their kindness, their strength, and sometimes their cruelty. I stayed silent to understand the truth about this place and the people who work here." The room fell silent. Even Richard, who had rarely been challenged in his life, froze. "I am Maya Brown," she continued. "And I am the majority owner of this company." Gasps filled the room. Whispers turned to stunned silence. Some employees covered their mouths, unable to believe what they were hearing. Richard's face went pale, and he took a step back, his eyes wide. "You," he stammered. "A janitor, owning this company? That's impossible." Maya looked at him steadily. "It is true. The papers are legal and verified. I inherited this company from my father and have been the majority owner for 15 years. I chose to remain silent, to watch and learn. I watched how you treated the people who keep this company alive. I watched how you led with fear, arrogance, and disrespect." Richard opened his mouth, but Maya raised her hand gently, stopping him. "I did not come here to shame you. I came here to show that leadership is not about power. It is about respect, fairness, and understanding. And you have failed." Richard's hands trembled. I built this company," he said weakly. Maya shook her head. "You may have managed it, but you forgot why it exists. It exists because of the people: every employee, every worker, every person who gave their time and effort. Without them, the company is nothing." She turned to the board. "Therefore, effective immediately, Richard Hale is relieved of his duties as CEO. Leadership will now come from someone who values every worker here, someone who understands their worth." Richard's lips trembled. He looked at the employees, hoping someone would speak up for him. But nobody did. They had seen too much, felt too much. His arrogance had isolated him completely. The security team stepped forward quietly, guiding him out of the room. Richard walked without protest, defeated, realizing that authority without respect is meaningless. Maya turned back to the employees. "This company will rebuild. Not just profits, but culture. Respect, honesty, and care will be the foundation of every decision we make. Every voice matters. Every effort is valued." A soft applause began in the back of the room. It grew louder as more employees joined in. Some had tears in their eyes, proud to finally be seen. They were no longer invisible. Later, Maya walked through the hallways she had cleaned for years. Workers greeted her differently now, with respect and admiration. "Thank you, Maya," a young clerk whispered. "We've always trusted you." She smiled. "I am here because of all of you. This company belongs to all of us. Remember that." Even the janitorial staff, who had always felt unnoticed, felt a new sense of pride. The simple act of sweeping floors or organizing supplies was now a contribution to something larger, a company that valued them. By evening, the city lights reflected off the glass windows of the building. Maya looked out at the skyline, thinking of her father, who had taught her the value of patience, humility, and quiet strength. She remembered the long nights, the hard work, and the moments when she had wondered if all her effort was worth it. Now she knew it had been. The story of the janitor who owned the company spread quickly, inspiring others in the city. But Maya did not seek fame. Her satisfaction came from knowing that tomorrow, every worker would feel seen and valued. And somewhere far away, Richard Hale sat alone, understanding finally that titles mean nothing without integrity, and authority is meaningless without respect. Maya walked through the empty office one last time that night, touching the clean floors she had polished so many times. She whispered to herself, "The company is safe now. And this time, it will rise because of people, not fear." Outside, the stars shone brightly. A new era had begun, one of justice, hope, and respect. Maya smiled, knowing that the journey of 15 years had finally led to this moment, a company rebuilt, not just in numbers, but in heart.